Hello, my name is Jen Riley. I am a third-year doctoral student at Kennesaw State University and a first-year faculty at Kansas State University. Today, I'm going to be sharing some research that I've conducted with you that is about social media and how consumers interpret and decide if they will engage with content. So let's dive right in. First, we'll talk about an overview and go over the research motivation, as well as kind of the landscape of what's been going on from the industry perspective for social media, as well as the research side of things. Then we'll talk about my research question. We'll go through methods, results, and some concluding thoughts. Over 97% of companies are using social media in their marketing strategy. And what that really tells us is that social media has been a huge catalyst in changing the conversation. Over 4,000 hours annually are spent engaging media. Now, while this isn't specific to social media hours spent, a lot of that media is online, is on your phone, it's television that is being rewatched in these dynamic ways that are not necessarily sitting at the TV when that broadcast happened. And it's really translucent for how much social media has impacted the rest of the world. Things like YouTube, that is considered a social media, and how the conversation has really elevated and changed things so drastically. People are spending an exorbitant amount of time utilizing and engaging with social media. From the research perspective, social media has been looked at as far as how is it contributing to being a part of a marketing strategy, gathering customer insights through social media, the advertising on social media, and people engaging with advertising, messaging on social media, and how that plays out. What are some do's and don'ts? How are people actually doing that engagement? And now the emerging topic area of social media within the professional sales force, and how salespeople are utilizing social media as a way of increasing their book of business, engaging customers, facilitating customer relationship management, etc. Which leads me to the research motivation for this idea of how are people interpreting these things? What are people thinking? What determines how they will engage, if they will engage? Does the author of that post matter? So, a little bit of background from the perspective of the researcher. Social media has become very dominant as far as a communication outlet. Companies and company representatives, more importantly, are publishing social media content. So the question becomes, well, how are consumers processing that content that they are posting on, that companies and company representatives are posting on social media? That leads us to this research question. Do customers consider the author of a social media content post that's published when evaluating if they will engage or not? If we go back to some of the fundamental social media research, we see that content generation and user-generated content, which is the content that really drives social media profiles and platforms, has to kind of fit three criteria historically. It has to be published publicly or to a select group of people, i.e. publicly on your page, or to a group of people that you follow and that you're connected with. It should be creative, which is a little subjective. We don't know exactly how each and every post is creative at this point in time, whereas before, in the infancy of social media, it could be said that all of it needs to be creative. And then it needs to be outside of professional purposes. Now, we can agree that based on how social media is being used, that one is a little bit more questionable as far as being one of the core parts of content on social media. However, for user generated, it's holds pretty true. But there are now more types of social media content other than just user generated. We have firm generated, marketer generated, you have salesperson generated, and now we have influencer generated as well. So those 3 points are definitionally attached to user generated content, but these other types can be in fact professional or have professional usage in them. Some examples. So this one on the left here is an example of the user generated. This is a person that is attending a sports event before COVID, obviously, and they are just basically categorizing and translating their lives. The one on the right, however, is a user or an influencer generated piece where they are seemingly sponsored by a brand, and they are featuring that brand and talking about their personal experience with using that brand, whether they're being a champion for it or critiquing it. Salesperson generated content is going to be something where a salesperson is sharing a little bit of a journey, so to speak, but more so attached to something. So whether it's an experience or a product, they are championing it, but they are not acting as that individual company or a marketing department for that company. And then we have firm generated content where it's coming from that company. It's also referred to as company generated content where there's a clear ask, a clear financial attachment, and even a partnership as we see here on the right. So to really assess how are people looking at this, it needed to be a qualitative study. We couldn't really give a survey and say, mark these things and what you think. We really wanted to have an interview and talk to people and say, okay, with this post, what are your thoughts? What is the process that you're going through when you're looking at this, and really understand how they're making some of their decisions as far as who is sending this, as in addition to will they engage or not. So we did a modified Q-sort where 23 social media posts were used, and we printed them off on 8.5 by 11 cards, and then showed the respondents and asked them 3 different prompts. Would you sort these based on who you think the author is into 2 different piles? Would you sort it based on if you think it's a user or a salesperson, an influencer, a salesperson, etc., to really see how they were seeing that content. All 23 posts were not used in every round, however, which is what helped us discern some different aspects of that content that they had attached to each different type of role for the author. And then after that, we did a semi-structured interview where we asked some follow-up details and really got into the metaphors of it all and understanding the underlying connotations of various elements like hashtags and emojis within content to understand how people were seeing these things. So some of our key findings, customers aren't really looking at the author of the post to decide who is doing it. It sounds really counterintuitive because if you're given something as a researcher, I think, okay, I'm going to look at the person that's posting it. But customers really looked at the actual content to decide, not the actual name of the profile. They really wanted to know and use the purpose of the content more so than the name listed on it, and they wanted that they determined that author based on their interpretation of what that content was. So if that content was sharing part of a journey or sharing part of a day, they assumed that was not professional content, that was from someone. They did that. The process of them figuring out if they wanted to engage with content was systematic. They looked at things and said, okay, if this is this something of interest to me? No. If this is this, and they went piece by piece. So those categories were the branding. If they saw a prominent logo, if they thought that people were staged, if the image quality was really, really high, or they just thought that the poster was being super professional, regardless of what the actual content was, I found that they thought it was a professional entity. And then the hashtag usage and emoji usage. The more hashtags and emojis used, they thought it was not company content. So some concluding thoughts. This research can help stakeholders to figure out how to connect with their target audiences. One thing that I've seen from the industry perspective is trying to figure out how to get customers to engage with content and to continuously engage with content. And through this research, I found that when customers feel like they are being sold to, they want to not engage based on principle. Whether they're interested or not, they are a little bit hesitant, or more hesitant than they would be ordinarily, for just general content from somebody that's sharing something organically. It also shared a lot of insights as far as the hashtags go and emojis, and the connotation or the underlying understanding from a consumer perspective that if you use those things, it's not considered professional. So that can promote some counterintuitive thoughts, because as an industry practitioner, you have some best practices like using hashtags, and you want to use that to increase the breadth of your messaging, but the consumers are seeing that as it being a person. So it was interesting to understand how consumers were seeing the different nuances of messages, and understanding that if a company is wanting to increase the reception of their messages, that they could do some things that would make the content seem way more casual. So this is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would love to discuss and share. Thank you.